Hello, I'm Andrea Goodman, conductor of the Cantilena Chamber Choir here in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. On Talking Choral Music, I introduce you to people from the world of choral music, some well known and others you should know about who are doing amazing things. In this episode, find out what it's like to sing in the Metropolitan Opera chorus, considered by most choral singers to be the greatest job on earth. Today's guests are Kurt Phinney, who is a tenor and the chorus's manager, and Sven Leaf, who retired after a 30-year career as a baritone in the chorus. They have a few amazing stories to share with you today. Thanks for watching, and please click on the subscribe button so you won't miss each new episode. Hello, Kurt. How are you? This is Kurt Phinney on the screen with us today, who is the chorus manager at the Met and a tenor. Started out there as a tenor, then became the chorus manager. So that was a nice way to go. And also with us, Sven Leaf, who had spent a 30-year career singing in the Met chorus and
33.
has, what's that? Oh,
33 years.
33, and has quite a lot of stories and many, many operas under his belt. So I just would like to jump in and start asking questions because this is a dream come true for most people who would love to sing in the Met chorus. I mean, we hear stories about somebody happened to be free for the evening. This is back in the 40s, and some friend, they met up in a bar, and he took him to the Met and put a costume on him and dragged him on and stood there as a spear thrower and what, in some opera. That doesn't happen really, I'm sure, but you always hear stories like that. So anyway, let's not belittle the talent that has to go into being a singer, a choral singer at the Met. It's extraordinary. So let's start with Kurt. Can you take us through a typical day? What is a typical day like at the Met chorus?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a year-round job. So that we're employed 52 weeks of the year, minus the vacation. And different parts of the year have different schedules. When we first start rehearsing, which is usually around August 1st, the first 3 or 4 weeks, there'll be nothing but music rehearsals. You can't stage something if you don't know what you're singing. And you have to have everything memorized before you can stage it. So very often the very beginning weeks of the rehearsal process, which again is around August 1st, is all music learning. And we're probably tackling, in the course of the 8 to 10 weeks of pre-season rehearsals, we're probably tackling maybe up as many as 15 different operas, and getting them in various stages of preparation. But the first couple of weeks, just music learning in List Hall, where the chorus master will establish where the cutoffs are going to be, where the breaths are going to be, what kind of articulations they want. And also the chorus master is in conversation with the conductors of the orchestra, who is obviously has his own take on it, but the chorus master is the one that's preparing it. So it's conveying those desires and those musical aesthetics to all of us. And then because our days are not overly long in the first month, most of your other time is spent trying to commit all of this music to memory. Once you get about halfway through the preseason, that 8 to 10 week period, then we start seeing preliminary rehearsals on what is called C level, which is the lowest floor in the Met. It's this in the basement. So it isn't at ground level, it's below it. It's ABC, or below the stage level. And then we have preliminary staging rehearsals there, where they have a mock-up of the set, but it's not the actual set. So you get a kind of idea, but mostly it's just things drawn on the floor with colored tape. This is where the stairs are, this is where a wall is, this is where a tree is. And we're going through all of the staging for the chorus scenes, cutting past long solos and things like that, and just trying to block the chorus. And that's while also having during those days more music rehearsals usually through the first 6 or 7 weeks. At the last couple of weeks of preseason, just before we open, then we start to hit the main stage, which is unavailable until then because they're doing a lot of tech rehearsals, trying to get things technically safe and artistically acceptable. And so the last couple of weeks, we tend to have less music rehearsals because we don't have time for them anymore. And we're down to a lot of sea-level staging and main stage and stagings on the main stage itself. And then the last week, you're starting to add costumes because in the opening week of the season, we will open at least 3 operas, okay, in the span of 1 week. So they have to have the orchestra rehearsals without costume, then the orchestra rehearsals with costume, then the final dress, and you're doing them for 3 different operas. So it's a very compressed experience at the end, and then finally the season starts. And then we go to working day and night. So once the season hits, which is 33 weeks long, usually through most of the season, we are having still daytime rehearsals of other operas that have yet to open. And then sea-level stagings of those other operas that have yet to open. And then eventually we start to go to the main stage during the day with the next opera to open. As one of because the way the Met works, it's not a stagione house. It's not a house that does one opera for 3 weeks. We rotate. So the Met will do 25 operas a year. And in any given week, we'll do 3 of them. Those 3 will run for 10 to 14 different performances, but we're alternating. Monday is Aida, Tuesday is Carmen, Wednesday is Bohème, Thursday we're back to Aida. So we're rotating these all while getting other operas ready during the day.
So excuse me, because I have a question here and I'll forget. Do you rotate the roster too? Or is it the same people doing all this 3 at the same time? That's just a...
Well, yes, and that is one of the challenges is that, let's say there's 25 operas a year. Not all of them use the full chorus. The chorus is comprised of 42 men, 38 women, and some operas will use us all, and some of them will use even more than 80. But others will, if it's Figaro, might be 24, 12 men, 12 women. So you might not be in everything. You certainly won't be over the course of the entire year. And let's say if the Met does 25 operas, the average chorister is probably in 20 of them. So you do have some nights off as whatever show that you're not cast in that year comes up, and you then get a little time off in the evening when those shows are running, or during the day when those shows are rehearsing.
Are there some rules around this that, is it AGMA?
Yes.
Decides how much is too much and how much is not enough, and how long you stand around, and
there are prohibitions, and then there are financial disincentives. Right, Sven? So
try to get those as much as possible.
So there are certain things that we don't do, like within 2 hours of curtain, we're not going to have a rehearsal unless there was an emergency relating to that evening's performance. So there are certain things that you won't do, and we cannot start before 10 o'clock in the morning because you were up till midnight. So there are certain prohibitions. Beyond that, there are just financial disincentives. That is to say that if they want to rehearse us until 5:30 with a 7:30 curtain, they'll pay more for those hours that are in close proximity to the evening performance because it represents a vocal hardship for the people who would be in that late rehearsal plus the evening performance. So, and AGMA does a great job of negotiating, and we have a great contract, and we have a great relationship with AGMA, and I have nothing but the highest respect for what they do to support and protect its members. They're an excellent union.
When I had 2 years at New York City Opera, often you were just rehearsing one at a time, and when it came to opening night, to say, if you want to check out the stage, go upstairs and look at it before the performance. And so all our staging was down with tape on the floor, which is really ridiculous. But then also I want to say that the excesses often come with stage directors. Like there was one time when we were rehearsing War and Peace, where the director he was a Russian, so he had a translator, but he kept like 60 chorus men there for an hour trying to pick one person to be in a certain spot in the scene that they were going to rehearse. Then the next day he comes and he finds the person he picked was in the wrong uniform to be there. So I mean, you were paying 60 people overtime, you know, for something that could have been solved in, you know, should have been solved before you even started the rehearsal, but didn't.
So Sven, can you tell us how you pace your voice to sustain all that work, singing all day and then in the evening too?
Well, I kind of started, I had a repertoire coach who was the accompanist for Flagstad and Ezio Pinza, and he said Flagstaff never marked, you know, she never, you know, doesn't matter, she always sang full out. But as a chorister, you have to take some rehearsals a little lighter on the voice, you know, but there's a proper way to mark and there's an improper way to mark, and so you don't want to tire your voice out marking. The other thing is not that important, but it's just I vocalize when I feel like I'm getting bad, or if I, and another thing is to set your voice, like being bass baritone. There are things that, in particular, like something like Verdi, like Trovatore, there's choruses that go up into the upper range of the baritone, really, and keep you up there. You know, it's not voice friendly for a bass, which I prominently was. But so you have to really lighten your voice up and get the kind of leggero sound instead of going full out on it, or you're not going to, you know, that's the only way you can get through it.
Wow.
Would you agree with that, Kurt? Yeah.
Well, most definitely. I have in Lohengrin, I have in the midst of the second act, above one of the A's that we're singing, because I'm a first tenor, I have the number 83. And that number is to tell me how many more notes above the staff I still have to sing, as a reminder to not be reckless with my resources, you know? So, you know, you have to figure out how to survive the night. I mean, Lohengrin is much easier, I think, for Lohengrin than it is for a first tenor in the chorus. He's got a couple of A's, but
the high C too at one point.
Yeah, he's got difficult parts in other ways. But even Ben Heppner, who was great as Lohengrin, was asked at one point, "What's the most difficult role for you to sing?" And he said, "For me, the most difficult role would be Count Almaviva, because it's a Rossini tenor, and Heppner's a Helden tenor." So,
Well, how many, how do you keep so many operas in your mind or in your memory, Kurt? Like, you know, that's a lot at once. And, you know, not to mention. Yeah.
And different people learn different ways. I'm a fast learner, but my scores are, God help whoever gets them, are heavily annotated with devices to help me remember all of these words in the order that they need to appear. But I'm very systematic about it. I sit at a desk. I don't even sit at a piano. I just sit at a desk, make sure that I've got a way to remember the text, and then I will learn it rather quickly, because I've come down with a system for remembering this phrase or that phrase. That being said, even though I memorize it quickly, I also forget it quickly. So my pattern is to, on tricky or unfamiliar operas that we don't do on an annual basis, I like to review it before I go down to the stage each day, you know. So I just do a quick review of anything that's wordy that isn't part of our normal repertoire.
Well, I'd love to know your tricks. Tell me what your system is. No, seriously. A lot of people would love to know.
Well, it's things like silly things like, oh, well, this phrase has a lot of words that begin with this letter, or this phrase has a lot of A vowels, you know, that, you know, it's a way to sort of say, to think how I group this. Or in the worst instance, when we're doing something in Russian, which is obviously the least familiar language that at least I deal with, where you literally come up with some banal transliteration that is just a false translation, that it's just words that sound like it, that I write above it as a way to get a picture of what it is I'm trying to remember. It is a chore to remember, you know, what is effectively nonsense, because we're not necessarily fluent speakers. I mean, if we're singing, we do Dvorak, it's in Czech, we do, you know, or Smetana, or we do Russian, or we do French, or we do, you know, German and Italian, and or even Sanskrit when we did the Philip Glass. So yeah, I have to annotate my score with just any kind of device that captures what a phrase is like in terms of its words.
I don't learn quickly, but I review a lot. And my basic thing was, I heard once coming into work one day, John Woodward was going to be coaching an opera somewhere. And what she was having them do her cast was to speak it in the language that you're doing it at first, you know, so you get a sense of what it means and in the words. Now, I don't do that, but what I would do is I make cards of really tricky sections and I go over those. I always review before a performance, you know, before the scene, before going down, just because when you're doing that many, it's easy for you to lose it quickly. And you also want to go like, where did I have problem in the last, you know, where did I run into some vocal difficulty? And when we first started, when I started in the Met in 1981, we still had what were all the part books, you know, so you would, like, the opening night was Norma, and you know, the chorus is on stage a lot with a lot of rest sometimes, so you would have, it was just the part book, and then you would have, like, you'd finish your singing section, then there'd be something like 430 measures with just, you know, 2 bars within front, no, you know, then you'd have and they were so, you know, you had no time signature, no key signature, and then then you'd come up to a part, you know, but there'd maybe be a small little note up there, not knowing what staff it was in, and that was your cue with the initial of the soloist who was going to be singing it, you know. But good luck trying to learn that. And in the rehearsals at that time, since it was men's rehearsal scores and women's rehearsal scores, it was difficult for the conductor to find, if he's starting at a certain spot, he'd have to, well, where are you, where's yours? And he'd have to grab someone's score and the men's, because it wasn't different, you know. And that was one thing that was really improved over in the years, is that now you have at least the chorus parts of all full scores, you know. So
Full scores, it's all proper scores. Now, they used to call those scores idiot scores, and yeah. They were just
it made everyone an idiot.
But yeah, there's one of the challenges is just, as Sven was saying, is just so many different operas, because if you rehearsed one on the sea level stage in the morning, one in List Hall in the afternoon, and then that night you're singing another one, trying to keep them all straight is difficult. So you're always reviewing, you know, as you go to stage. I always, you know, sometimes I would go home for dinner if there was time, you know, and I'd come, my wife would say, well, what's the show tonight? And I'd look at her blankly, like, I'm not really sure, but no, it starts at 7:30. And I thought to myself, if they ever put out the wrong costume, I'm sunk, because I'll sing whatever costume they put out. So,
so I'd like to ask both of you, what type of characters do you typically play, and how does that evolve as your career progresses at the Met? Kurt?
well, you know, clearly, you know, when you start, like, you're going to play probably someone on the younger end of the spectrum, you know, and of course, depending on the opera and the director, sometimes the chorus is dealt with in a kind of Greek chorus anonymous kind of way, and we just represent a solid block. And then there are other things where you deal with someone like Zeffirelli, who was very particular about the individuals as characters, and he would assign costumes that were very particular to what people looked like, and where they were in their course of their life, and so those became much more individual. And obviously, when I was young, I was, you know, they would say, oh, he's going to be a Lehrbuben and Meistersinger, because those are the young apprentices. And now maybe I'd be a, you know, something beyond that. But yeah, so you sort of age along through your career into, you know, roles that are appropriate for how you appear, because let's face it, it's not just singing, it's, you know, there's acting to go along with it as well. And curiously, what we're noticing, and Sven probably can attest to this too, is that whereas stage makeup used to solve many of these things, oh, we can make him look older or younger or whatever, because so many things are now on HD, that makeup just really doesn't work in a close-up like this, you know. So really they have to go with something a lot more natural, which means you're probably going to be looking more like exactly who you are. So makeup is much less a part of it, and we're more likely, as I said, just to play something more akin to ourselves as we are in our whatever stage of life we're in.
Talking about Zeffirelli, Kurt and I had the privilege of being right down front for the second and third act of Turandot, and having Turandot and Kayla screaming at high C's right in our ears, you know. It damaged. And then we had one conductor who did it, wanted to hold the last note out just forever, you know. And
yes,
you know, he would do things like have a pause, like dramatic pause, when there was none written.
Right. Oh
and-
yeah, we're holding high notes until you were changing color, turning red, plaid, chartreuse. Just oh, it was brutal. But it's a great, great opera, and it's a great production, and the Met still does it with good reason. It's the Met is good at what's over the top, and turning that is.
I mean, that the scene changes in that opera in particular, something like in the second act, you have Ping Pang and Pong opening it up with their scene, and with basically 3 to maybe 5 characters on there, and then lined up behind stage, there are about 150 people, choristers, extra choristers, stoopers, ballet, that get on within the less than 30 seconds, I would say, and the curtain goes up, and it's this big, huge, it's
Quite a
very dramatic.
spectacle. I think one New York Times article said it was Beijing by way of Las Vegas, because it's pretty glitzy. But again, it's a huge space, and subtle is probably not going to carry the day in a 4,000 seat theater, and that's why Zeffirelli, who was kind of a cinematic grand sweep to his conceptions, he did the Tosca, the Bohème, Carmen. Othello. I mean, he did all the biggies and very successfully, and many of them are still running because they are so good.
Right. So then, I just want to ask you, have you had a chance to jump into a small role being in the chorus?
Oh yeah, I initially I did. My first was doing one of the lackeys in Rosenkavalier, and it was interesting because it was opening night and my second season. And Luciano Pavarotti was singing the Italian aria, and I had to stand out there as a lackey for the whole scene, basically, once I got on. And, to hear him sing it and to hear, there were some other silly things that came on, but it was kind of fun to observe. And you just kind of stand there by a door motionless, for it. But it was, we always used to, then there was another cue for the lackeys right at the end of the act. And of course, Rosenkavalier has the great trio at the end, which is the one with the trio. And we had one of our coaches, I think it was Walter Tausig, who said, this is the great quartet in the opera, because it lasts all maybe 12 measures, but it's like real fast, and you're just running the stage and
the lackey scene. Yeah, that was also one of those lackeys at one point. And again, another great production. That was a Nat Merrill production, and who really knew how to tell a story to a 4,000 seat hall.
He had everything memorized with the costume you were in, and it was, somehow he fell out of favor, I think, because he was too good at something. But he was
a great production.
So
we usually the chorus does small roles. There's numerous roles that are defined in the contract as being chorus roles, and to do those every year, anyone chorister who's interested has to audition, and usually, they're usually just a line or two, but or even just a word, but it's called for in the score, and someone has to sing it, and so we audition for it right in List Hall, which is our rehearsal space, and they just pick whosever voice speaks the best, because that's a curious thing. When you have a very small solo, you don't have time to warm up, or a time to to redeem yourself. It's over in a blink. And so you have to make sure that your voice speaks instantly in the register of that particular solo, which is why they want to hear you sing the actual part, and to just see whose voice is most present in that register.
And then they give you an extra $5 or something like that to do it?
There's all structured fees for the solos depending on how long they are. All very clearly marked out in the CBA, which is the collective bargaining agreement with AGMA.
The only thing I would say is that with the small bit parts, like the only time it's really noticed is if you miss it.
Right.
And then at least your colleagues will remind you, and
right.
You try not to go, oh.
There's no time for glory, but there's time to screw it up. Right.
So what about touring? Do you tour? Well, in the old days when you did tour, where there's also a turnover in repertoire for a tour, is that pretty much one opera?
No, it was seven different operas initially when we did the 8-week domestic tour, and with different casts coming in at sometimes, and you know, the sets were all scaled down. The costumes were the same, but the sets were all scheduled to, you know, fit the theater that they were going, which were always smaller stages. Now, the, you know, just the logistics of this was extremely. We had two 747 jets that would carry all the orchestra, the chorus, some of the soloists, stagehands, and then there were like 40 trucks that were carrying costumes and sets for the opera, you know. And then, you know, I think it was my second year, we were in Memphis, and we learned that we were initially, they'd been flying for Braniff Airlines. So Braniff Airlines went bankrupt, and so like our chorus, not the chorus, but the company trip organizer had to find somebody to take us to Dallas, like on one day, one evening's notice kind of thing, you know. And somehow we managed, and we went with United and made it there.
I never did the domestic tour. It had ended by the time I joined the chorus. I joined in '92 as a full-timer. 94, sorry, as a full-timer. I was in '91 as a part-timer. But I never did the domestic tours. I did tour to Germany and to Japan numerous times. But that was a smaller affair where they would bring a couple operas, 2 or 3 maybe, and it was usually for a month. And but the domestic tour was just a matter of legend by the time I got there.
There was one time where on the domestic tour they'd scheduled Lohengrin, and so many, there was like the bass section, they don't take any extra choristers for the most part on tour. And so there were like 16 bass baritones, and there's the Brabants and the Saxons. Now they had 8 on a part each time. Well, the Brabants were down to like 2 basses for that bass part, you know. So as a Saxon, you've heard it enough, but you know, you'd be singing both lines when you could, just to help out, you know.
Cover the parts.
And we did Tosca one night, and I think there was a backstage chorus in the second act, you know, like before going out for the Today.
The cantata.
Yeah, the cantata. And there were only 2 basses. Herman Marcus and I were the only 2 basses, because all the rest of the basses were out getting ready for the execution, you know, being
supering.
The guards. Yeah, they were supering, you know. So it was really kind of on the fly a lot of the time, you know. But
so I have a few questions about getting into the chorus. So the requirements for a singer to get in the first place must be fairly rigorous. Aside from having a beautiful voice, I'm sure there are other talents. Someone has to be able to move, and you know, maybe sight reading is part of it, or being able to memorize, or physical stamina. So Kurt, can you tell us about the extra talents that somebody has to have? Do they have to dance, or acrobatics, or
no? You may be obliged or called upon to do so once you get hired, but in the process of the audition, it's really the voice that's steering the bus. So we look for, and I'm as a business manager there, I'm also at all of the auditions and have been for the past 20 years. So we're looking for, first of all, an uncomplicated voice. Okay, that is to say, you know, some voices may have something unique or unusual about it that might lend itself very well to a soloist career, but there has to be a kind of a purity of voice that makes it malleable enough that it can serve for Mozart, and it can serve for Verdi, and it can blend with other people. So one of the crucial things is just a kind of uncomplicated blendability. And also we're looking for, as they're singing, you know, how is their musicianship? And we have excellent pianists that are, you know, helping them along, but you can tell in the course of the audition whether someone really knows how to pace a phrase, and how to, and is getting all of the markings in the arias that we're well familiar with. So that's really primary. The next thing is that we're really not looking for a lot of antics or acting. You know, we want them to be fairly composed and not allow theatrics to distract them and us from job one, which is, can you sing? So when we listen to someone also, so we want you to be, we don't mind you moving a bit or a gesture here or there, but if it's the arms are going all over the place, and you know, then we're a little afraid that they won't be able to show the composure that's necessary often for us on stage as we're singing, because very often we're impart a backdrop to something that should be drawing focus. So you want someone that can be very composed when they sing. When they do sing, you want to make sure that when they finish their aria, you want to say to yourself, that person could sing it again. If they sound like they're done after one aria, they'll never survive a day at the Met. So they have to sound like they can turn around and sing it again. And so we don't want anyone, you be careful not to oversing. We can tell when people are trying to make their voice a Met-sized voice. You know, we need you to sing, show us as much voice as you can show without oversinging. We need to know that there's enough voice there to contribute in a 4,000 seat theater, but we also need to know that you're not oversinging, because if you are, you won't survive a week at the Met. So it's, you know, it's finding that right balance of showing as much as you can and not too much, being composed and having a voice that is mellifluous and smooth. We ask for a lyric aria. We don't want a lot of recitative in an audition. We want to know, can you sing a line? Can that voice spin evenly? Those are the things. Is the voice blendable? Those are the things that we're looking for. And we have an extra chorus, which is absolutely the preferred route, if we can, for hiring people. Of course, we've hired great voices out of the blue, but if we have someone that's a great voice, that's, you know, that and there's an opening at the time for that person, we would very much like to have the extra chorister. We know their work record, because, and Sven will tell you that we're in the dressing room a lot, we're in close quarters a lot. So you need to know something about the work ethic and how they mesh with other people, because that's a huge component. This is a high pressure place. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of high strung artists in a small space. So we want someone that'll be collegial, that can work well with other people. So our extra chorus is an ideal proving ground. I got it.
If you like this video, just click the button below to subscribe, and thanks for watching.